Humans stopped 9 wars before they began, without firing a shot. They called it the Vault. Not a vault in the traditional sense, but a fortress of silence and light carved into the dark side of Virex Prime's fourth moon. The surface shimmered with plasma-tinted shields, opaque to the eye, immune to scans. There were no doors, only phased corridors that responded to genetic clearance. Inside, 23 figures sat around an arc-shaped chamber, bathed in low blue luminescence. Holographic projections of star systems rotated slowly at the center, flickering every time a new simulation was processed. This was the strategic assembly chamber of the Galactic Council, and today its gravity was not metaphorical. At the highest tier of the amphitheater, the presiding voice Grand Consul Orvental of the Altheri, Dominion signaled the start of the meeting by simply leaning forward. No gavel, no declarations, only movement and silence. That was enough. All heads turned his way. This gathering is convened under Omega Protocol. He stated, his voice a soft resonance of 3 overlaid tones. No external links, no recorders, no pressurization to the media hubs. What is spoken here does not exist outside these walls. His eyes swept the room, irises shifting like oil on water. Proceed. The reason for this extraordinary confidentiality war. Not one, but several looming ones. Not declared, but inevitable. The collapse of the Yinar truce on the outer rim. The unexplained military buildup near Sector 12. Vanishing diplomatic envoys. Whispers of preemptive strikes cloaked as defense exercises. There was too much tension, too many variables, and not enough clarity. The council had convened to prevent chaos, or at least prepare for it. Down near the central table, seated silently, was the only human in the room. Sophia Hart. Her presence, though unannounced in galactic broadcasts, drew subtle glances, like gravity pulling attention without command. She sat straight, shoulders squared, arms relaxed but unmoving. She wore no decorative sigils, no shimmering fabrics like the Drakari ambassador beside her, whose robes reflected starlight. Instead, she wore a plain graphite gray suit, tailored, sharp polished, but without ornamentation. Her eyes were deep hazel, unblinking, tracking every speaker, every data point. Sophia was Earth's appointed high strategist and senior representative to the Galactic Council, a title that, despite its prestige, few in the room treated seriously. To most, humanity was a fringe species, new, underdeveloped, culturally erratic, emotionally volatile. Tolerated, observed, not respected. Yet today she had been invited into the inner ring of military discourse, a gesture many assumed was ceremonial at best. She had not spoken since the council began. Not a single note, no gestures. She hadn't even brought a datapad. In contrast, the rest of the chamber pulsed with interactive projections, voice-synced neural boards, and at least 3 simultaneous translation overlays per delegate. Her stillness made her seem absent, or detached. The Varunat envoy, a species of floating crystalline spires, remarked through its linguistic symbiote, "The human seems observational." It wasn't an insult, but it wasn't neutral either. Sophia did not reply. She simply offered the briefest nod. To some it looked like passivity. In truth, it was calibration, observation, analysis. A game she had mastered well before the age of 20. A game in which silence, not speech, often revealed more. Around her, the council's discussion grew heavier. The Razic fleets have repositioned closer to the trade lanes. Again, muttered General Tech, a reptilian war tactician of the Krovak Alliance. Their excuses of routine drills insult even my tail. Another delegate, the insectoid prefect Zuloi of the Catalak Hive, hissed in counterpoint. The Tarak are reinforcing their cryoweapons division. They claim it is in response to increased Vernat probing along the Helix passage. Perhaps the real insult is in our assumptions. Enough, growled Lorax, the massive charcoal-skinned general of the Drakari Imperium, whose voice felt like it scraped across iron. He towered over his podium, fingers clenched. You all dance with words while sectors burn. The Razic test us. The Catalak build silently. The humans remain eerily quiet. His gaze landed on Sophia with the weight of a thunderstorm. Maybe Earth prefers to wait until vultures fight over the meat before it takes the bones. Sophia's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite a warning. Meanwhile, the council attempted in vain to construct a unified strategy. Some demanded immediate joint mobilization of defense forces. Others argued for covert ops and espionage. A few outliers proposed that all fleets retreat inward and lock planetary systems in stasis shields. But every suggestion ran into the same wall: mistrust. The Drakari refused to align forces with the Catalak due to a generations-old betrayal. The Thalkari viewed joint operations with synthetic minds like the Arconians as sacrilege. Even communication protocols varied so widely that simulated responses were prone to error. General Tech Impatient slammed his six-digit hand against the side of his projection table. Every strategy assumes we trust each other enough to execute it. That is fantasy, and fantasies do not win wars. Orvental nodded slowly, leaning back. Then what does win wars? General Sophia spoke. It was not a declaration, not an interruption. Just 5 words, soft but clear. Preparedness, without disclosure or consent. The room stilled. She continued, her tone measured, almost conversational. Wars are not won by trust. They are won by readiness. And loath as I am to interrupt the galactic theater of strategic contradictions, I must offer clarity. Every scenario discussed in this room, every potential alliance, every betrayal vector, every fleet movement pattern has already been modeled, analyzed, and simulated by human strategic systems over a decade ago. It was as though gravity deepened. Several delegates activated neural links in panic. Others whispered to aides off-channel. Lorax stepped forward, teeth bared. You lie. Earth lacks the surveillance reach. You don't have the ships. You don't even have jurisdiction beyond your own moon cluster. Sophia turned to him, unblinking. We don't need ships to read your tactics. We need only watch your patterns. You call it weakness. We call it leverage. And then, for the first time since she arrived, Sophia reached into her jacket and placed a small cube onto the center projection table. It activated without touch, without request. Dozens of light tendrils shot into the air, forming a web of data maps, fleet trajectories, covert communications logs, encrypted message decryption, overlays, all organized, all time-stamped, all correct. The entire room stared. Someone gasped. Someone else swore. 217 conflict scenarios, she said quietly. 94% predictive accuracy over the past 16 years. 17 of them involved Earth being annihilated as collateral damage. In 0 of them did we lose. The room did not speak, not even Lorax. She leaned back, hands folded calmly. I'm not here to gloat, nor to threaten. I'm here to remind you of something you may have forgotten. While polishing your egos with weapons-grade delusion, Earth is not fragile. It is prepared, and if necessary, it is patient. Silence again. Not the kind born from awkwardness, but the heavy metallic kind that precedes either surrender or something much, much worse. And in that silence, the network of light twisted into a shape none expected. A spiral, a human fingerprint. Marked over every battle, every alliance, every betrayal, not passive, not endangered, but present, watching. I believe Sophia Hart began, her voice not loud but surgically placed into the center of the chamber, that the question you're all avoiding isn't whether a war is coming, but how long you've been sleepwalking into one. The air inside the strategic assembly chamber seemed to fold inward, as though her words displaced not just sound, but gravity itself. Every species in the room, whether with ears, resonance nodes, or data-absorbent carapaces, turned toward her as one. Some leaned forward, others stiffened, a few froze entirely. General Tech blinked twice, his secondary eyelids reacting faster than his conscious mind. Orvental, the presiding voice, tilted his head a fraction, betraying a flicker of curiosity. Lorax did not move, but the edges of his obsidian jaw clenched visibly. Sophia's tone remained precise, her posture unchanged. You've all conducted your threat assessments, your simulations, your war games, but you're missing something essential. The enemy isn't just external, it's complacency, repetition, the assumption that conflict always begins with an act of violence. What if it begins with silence, her words carved through the ambient hum of alien processors and strategic overlays like a scalpel? Delegates exchanged glances, some through ocular movement, others via bioluminescent flashes and shared neural pulses. Silence from a human, especially in a room of cosmic tacticians, had been interpreted as weakness. But now that same silence twisted into something unnerving, a tactical pause deliberately placed before the strike. Ambassador Calyx of the Shalnir Collective, a thin creature composed mostly of vibrating tendrils, spoke up voice, modulated through a trinary synth organ. You imply that Earth has been active monitoring galactic trajectories. Sophia did not look at him, nor at anyone in particular, not implying, confirming. She extended one hand slowly toward the table before her. Another cube, the same design as the one she had revealed in the first session, activated without contact. This time the projection showed not just military scenarios but encrypted communications intercepted from deep space relays, energy signature decay patterns from ship engine variants, behavioral shift data of species, leadership profiles, even fluctuations in planetary atmospheric compositions suggestive of cloaked fleet staging. For the past 48 years, she said humanity has maintained an autonomous quantum intelligence network, Aurelius, dedicated to the passive collection, interpretation, and prediction of strategic behavior across known galactic civilizations. We embedded it inside existing communication corridors. No additional satellites, no distinct signals, just pattern-leveraged parasitic algorithms riding your own networks. That's espionage, barked General Tech, standing halfway. That's not diplomacy, it's violation. Sophia raised a single eyebrow. It's survival. Your species was still cataloging nebulae when Earth experienced 3 world wars before reaching interstellar range. Forgive us if we no longer wait to react. The reaction was immediate yet fragmented. The Arconian silicon-based intellects began processing the implications at terahertz, speeds, their tendrils pulsing as they recalculated. The Drakari emitted high-frequency protests, offended more by the implication of inferiority than the espionage itself. Several aquatic delegates shifted within their water-sealed suits, exchanging bursts of colored pheromones visible even outside their chambers. But beneath the outrage, something deeper bloomed: respect. Or perhaps fear, wearing the mask of respect. If this is true, murmured Prefect Zuloi, her mandibles twitching, how have we not detected this? Aurelius. Because you weren't looking, Sophia replied, still seated. You assumed humanity was a latecomer, that we lagged behind. You mistook our silence for absence. It wasn't. She tapped a finger gently against the table. We designed Aurelius not as a weapon but as a map, a living simulation updated in real time. It doesn't simply watch, it learns. It predicted this very session with 91% accuracy. It foresaw the Drakari fleet posture in orbit around Nexus 12. It forecasted the Hive's resurgence attempts and the quiet sabotage of the Thalkari Jatun Treaty before it even signed. And yet Orvental spoke slowly. Now you chose to remain silent until now. Why? Because revealing it before would have changed nothing, Sophia answered. You weren't ready to listen. Now with war teetering on the edge of rhetoric, maybe you'll hear what has always been obvious. She stood then, a subtle movement. No theatrical gestures, yet even that shift in posture commanded attention. The way she spoke, the cadence, the clarity, it didn't feel like she was merely delivering information. She was orchestrating it. You fear the wars ahead, she continued, but humanity doesn't. Not because we crave them, not because we underestimate the cost, but because we understand what lies beneath them. What breeds conflict isn't aggression, it's miscalculation. And we've removed miscalculation from our equation. For a moment, the room became a spectrum of discomfort. Several delegates began speaking over each other, protests, counterpoints, accusations. Lorax, however, remained still. His silence now held a different flavor. Not contempt, not disbelief, but contemplation. When he finally spoke, it was with careful calculation. You've revealed much human, enough to unsettle, enough to impress. But the question remains, if your intelligence is this vast, your preparation so meticulous, why tell us why now? Sophia met his gaze without blinking. Because there is one threat even Aurelius cannot model: chaos introduced by emotion, fear, desperation. We detected changes in your communication posture, General. Changes suggesting irrational command decisions. That's not a war we can predict. That's a war we have to prevent. I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm here to stop you from triggering something you don't understand. The implication was surgical, not an accusation, a warning. And the room responded not with rebuttal, but restraint. Even those who moments ago clamored with outrage now turned inward, reassessing assumptions. A being like Sophia, composed of patience analysis and unflinching presence, did not bluff. She didn't need to. Her certainty made more noise than any speech. Delegates began privately recalibrating their internal defense codes. Others discreetly accessed their own national AI systems, attempting to validate what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just the information that shook them, it was the presentation. Human intelligence wasn't accidental. It was curated surgical quiet until chosen otherwise. You've watched us all this time, whispered Ambassador Dajan of the Arconians. What if you choose to act, not merely observe? Sophia offered the barest of smiles. Then you'll know, Ambassador, not from words, but from results. And there it was, the moment when fear eclipsed arrogance. For decades, humanity had been the outlier, the latecomer, the unstable variable in a stable galactic formula. But now the equation had flipped. The unknown wasn't Earth's weakness, it was its shield. And Sophia Hart, who had walked into the chamber invisible, now stood at the axis of attention, wielding not power, but the knowledge that true power was never spoken until it had already shaped the world. Sophia Hart moved her hand with the same calm precision as before, and the cube she had activated earlier changed its projection. The holographic threads retracted momentarily, reorganizing themselves into a lattice of interconnected nodes, glowing softly with pulsating white and pale green lights. What you're looking at now, she said, her voice never rising above conversation level, is the Sentinel Web. It is not a fleet. It is not an array of satellites. It is something far more elusive. She stepped toward the center dais, slowly, the flickering lattice reflecting in her eyes. The Sentinel Web is an integrated decentralized intelligence network built over 76 years, layered atop the existing galactic infrastructure. It's invisible because it doesn't exist as a singular system. It's a symbiotic overlay on the networks you already use. There was a ripple of tension throughout the chamber, and the murmurs returned like static rising. It operates using parasitic quantum nanocache modules. Sophia continued, disguised as subroutine fragments within your own relay hubs, civilian data traffic, and interstellar diplomatic exchanges. They require no active broadcasting, no power draw, no signatures. They live inside your noise, and they only wake when queried by human intelligence cores. The Drakari envoy hissed something in its native harmonic dialect, which was quickly translated as, "You're saying your system is writing our systems?" Sophia nodded. "Correct. And before you call it an invasion, ask yourselves how long it has been there." She didn't need to elaborate. The implication was already corrosive. The projection expanded, displaying a three-dimensional map of known space. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of blinking markers emerged across sectors, ranging from the volatile fringe territories of the Scorched Belt to the economic cores of the Yinar merchant enclave. From the binary worlds of Razik to the underwater network hives of the Polari, every major civilization, every trade corridor, every diplomatic relay had been touched. There is no region unobserved, Sophia said. The system was designed to be passive listening learning, not interfering, unless activated. Prefect Zuloi, the insectoid representative of the Catalak hive, clicked her mandibles in a display of tension. And yet no one detected this. No security scan, no anomaly. Sophia turned to her. You weren't scanning for it. You were looking for threats that looked like you. We didn't need to act like predators. We only needed to blend in as dust. It was a brutal metaphor, but it held truth. Even the Arconians, famed for their data integrity architecture, were visibly disturbed. One of them, Ambassador Dajan, murmured, "The entropy profiles. They must have matched ambient drift perfectly." "They did," Sophia replied. Aurelius designed them to, but the Sentinel Web did not stop at military data. The real value, Sophia continued, is not in knowing where your fleets are. It's in understanding why they're there. Motivations, cultures, traditions. How your people think, not just how they fight. A new projection blooms social trend analysis from the Krovach colony's economic sentiment scans, from the merchant conclave's predictive behavior models built from mythological patterns within the Thalkari sacred songs. Your art, your rituals, your entertainment feeds, all analyzed, all factored. Lorax sneered from his station. What use is culture to war? Sophia didn't flinch. Everything. Wars are not started by weapons. They are started by beliefs, mistranslations, cultural trauma, pride, misplaced symbols. If you don't understand the emotional language of a civilization, you can't predict when they'll break or why they'll snap back harder. That's not strategy, the Thalkari envoy snapped. That's manipulation. That's insight, Sophia corrected. And it saves lives. The projection shifted again. Now it showed fragments of intercepted poetic epics from the Hive's emergent generation used to determine ideological shifts. Then a loop recording of a children's holographic program from the Razik that began subtly encouraging distrust of multi-species treaties. Then a series of silent glances from a diplomatic dinner recorded years ago, fed into micro-expression analysis, now interpreted as premeditated subterfuge. What's more, Sophia added, even this counsel was never beyond reach. A pause fell, heavy, intimate. Then a subtle flicker in the air signaled the projection of the very chamber they were in, recorded time-stamped archived from 5 cycles ago. Discussions that had never been made public. That's a violation of Galactic Accord, hissed Ambassador Calix. Article 31 was written to prevent interference, Sophia interjected smoothly. We didn't interfere, we observed. You call it a violation. We call it foresight. She walked a step forward. We saw the cracks before they formed. We heard the tone shift before your mouth opened. Then for the first time someone cracked. It was Prefect Zuloi. Her carapace darkened with a flush of stress pheromones. You've been watching us for decades, she rasped. Why did no one see this? Sophia looked at her. Because seeing is an act of permission? You never believed humans capable, so you dismissed the signals. Zuloi recoiled and others began to stir. Ambassador Dajan's tone became sharper. You've effectively admitted to psychological intrusion. How far does this go? Have you altered anything? Sophia's response was clean. No alterations. Only understanding. We made no decisions for you. We just made sure we were ready when you did. Some tried to challenge that. The Drakari deputy envoy barked something about technical impossibility and demanded a systems audit, only to be reminded by a quiet whisper from their aide that 3 of their own relays had already shown inexplicable bandwidth anomalies years earlier. Anomalies that had been dismissed as solar interference. The Thalkari, increasingly indignant, attempted to dispute the accuracy of the cultural data, presented only to have Sophia pull up a 10-year trend report on their educational reform programs, accurate to the decimal. By now, the projection was no longer just data. It was mirror after mirror held up against every species, every assumption. The network was not a system, it was a reflection. And everyone was finally seeing themselves unfiltered, decoded, understood in ways they had not consented to, but could not deny. Even Orvin Tal, ever composed, sat forward in visible tension. You are suggesting, he said slowly, that humanity has known more about our political and military evolutions than we ourselves understood. Sophia turned to him and said plainly, yes. And just like that, it became personal. Not a single delegate looked at their colleagues the same way. Doubt ignited behind every gaze. Who had spoken too much at a diplomatic gala? Who had used unsecured neural uplinks? Who had unknowingly fed the web? The chamber that once echoed with strategic arrogance was now filled with suspicion, recalibration. Even Lorax, proud and immovable, had shifted his stance. His jaw was clenched, but his breathing had changed. Slower, more measured. Threatened not by fleet, but by something more insidious irrelevance. You have built a net, he growled finally and cast it wide. But do not think knowledge is supremacy. Sophia studied him a moment, then said no, but it is survival, and that's what Earth has always pursued quietly, thoroughly, and indefinitely. Her gaze swept the room, not challenging, but patient. Now that you know it exists, you'll try to replicate it. Some of you will try to destroy it. Some will try to weaponize it, but you won't succeed because the Sentinel Web isn't a tool. It's a philosophy, one built on the one truth humanity learned too early, too painfully: never again wait for the fire to start before looking for the smoke. The lights dimmed slightly as the projection receded, and in the absence of glowing data, only the eyes remained, hundreds of them, of every shape and spectrum, fixed on the human who had spoken less than anyone, and yet said more than all. The silence wasn't confusion anymore. It was reckoning. Sophia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were sharp enough to silence galaxies. The Drakari Imperium has been preparing a full-spectrum invasion of Earth for the past 12 years. The operation is codenamed HFY, and it was scheduled to activate within the next 3 cycles. The temperature in the chamber didn't change, but the atmosphere thickened instantly. Delegates shifted in their seats. The lights flickered slightly, not from any malfunction, but from the subtle surge of power as multiple internal recorders override subroutines and cognitive dampeners engaged. In the very center of the chamber, Lorax, the obsidian-skinned warlord of the Drakari, slowly turned his head toward her. It was not a fast reaction. It was deliberate, calculated. But the weight behind his movement was seismic. Lorax wasn't just a delegate. He was the supreme military executor of the Drakari Imperium, an entity that controlled the second largest fleet in known space and occupied over 70 inhabited systems. His influence was so deeply entrenched in the Council's military planning subcommittees that no weapon escalation protocol could be ratified without his symbolic approval. He was more than muscle. He was machinery, politics, intimidation, and legacy wrapped in one massive frame. Sophia, as if impervious to his glare, reached once more into the inner lining of her coat. A second cube, distinct from the others in size and glow, was placed on the table. It pulsed red, a hue that in this chamber was rarely seen, the kind of red reserved for classified threat codes and planetary quarantine notices. Contained within this archive, she said, are 12 intercepted transmission logs, 5 visual recordings, 2 extracted memory imprints, and 1 internal fleet mobilization order from the Drakari 4th War Cell, all of which explicitly identify Earth as a primary target for resource extraction and geoform conversion. The projections came alive, spilling across the room like liquid fire. A hologram displayed a war meeting within a Drakari command carrier, dark lighting outlines of 6 officers, Lorax among them. Earth's defensive grid is outdated. Their alliances are fragmented. If we time the strike during a regional solar maximum, their outer sensors will fail to detect our approach until orbital insertion, one of them said. Then Lorax's voice unmistakable. We take the minerals, we leave no colony, no negotiations, no broadcasts, no prisoners. Even through the layered languages and varied perception modes of the Council delegates, the meaning was clear. It wasn't just strategy, it was intention. Undeniable. Orvin Tal, usually the most composed being in the room, leaned forward, his layered pupils constricting. General Lorax, do you deny the authenticity of this data? Before Lorax responded, he stood, towering, breath steady, muscles tight beneath armor, interwoven with bone metal. This is fabrication, sophisticated, yes, but lies nonetheless. His voice echoed like cracking stone. The Drakari have never issued such orders. We do not fear Earth, but we do not need it. You need thorium-rich crust, Sophia interjected coolly, which Earth has in abundance. Your own mining colonies on Vornath collapsed 3 cycles ago, and your failed treaty with the Razik cut off your alternate supply. You're cornered. And Earth, isolated, underestimated, is the perfect extraction point. Enough, Lorax roared. His voice activated emergency acoustic dampeners. A few delegates instinctively activated personal shields. You come here human and dare accuse the Drakari of preemptive genocide. With what authority? Sophia didn't flinch. With the authority of proof, and with the burden of survival. Her eyes met his unblinking. You see, General Earth didn't intercept these transmissions through luck. We were fed them, by someone within your own command chain. Lorax froze. That more than anything ignited the chamber into chaos. Dozens of voices broke protocol, shouting over each other in a blend of dialects and frequencies. The Vurunat envoy demanded verification through neural trace. The Catalak hive clicked furiously, demanding a full temporal audit. The Thalkari accused both sides of manipulative theater. Even the Arconians began a silent chain code analysis on the file hashes. Meanwhile, Lorax was breathing differently now. Not heavily, strategically, processing, fighting not Sophia, but possibility. If someone in his ranks had betrayed him, how deep had the infection spread? It is easy to conjure images. He finally spoke more controlled now. Easy to forge voice overlays. Earth has advanced in digital deception. This could all be illusion. The voices aren't just your words, Lorax, Sophia said. They are supported by logistics reports signed with your biometric seal, decoded by one of your own encryption frames, recovered from the debris field near the Kuros Drift. If this is forgery, then your internal networks have already been compromised beyond salvage. Silence. Ambassador Dajan of the Arconians, still translating data at speeds unimaginable to organic minds, broke in through his harmonic translator. Preliminary checks suggest authenticity. The timestamps align with known Drakari command patterns. Corruption probability, negligible. Lorax's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. His silence spoke more than rage could. And in that moment of fracture, alliances began to shift. Prefect Zuloi tilted her head, a motion signaling decision. The hive acknowledges the evidence. We propose an immediate independent audit under the observation of the Council's Central Ethics Committee. Several nods followed. Not unanimous, but significant. More tellingly, however, were the glances. Delegates once wary of Earth now looked at Sophia differently. Not as a stranger, but as a sentinel. As someone who knew more than anyone ever gave her credit for. And that in its own quiet way terrified them. Ambassador Calix, usually skeptical, spoke with measured words. Humanity has displayed both foresight and self-restraint. The threat may still exist, but the way Earth revealed it raises deeper questions, such as asked Orvin Tal, such as whether we've misjudged who poses the greater danger. Calix responded, the predator or the observer. A hush returned, not peace, just the fragile silence that follows when everyone realizes the rules have changed. Earth was no longer the prey, no longer the unknown. It was now the variable that had modeled the system before anyone else knew it was being watched. And as eyes turned back to Lorax, whose silence was now heavier than iron, some began to fear not his warships, but Sophia's restraint. There was a long pause after the last evidence file flickered out, leaving the chamber in the dim hum of retreating projection light. No one dared speak, at least not yet. Delegates who moments ago had postured as giants now stared at the human strategist as if realizing they had spent years playing a game on a board they hadn't even seen in full. Sophia Hart, framed by the holographic ghost of a once-denied conspiracy, stepped back to the center of the ring. What I've shared so far concerns military aggression, she began, voice level and unimposing. But the game didn't begin there. Nor did Earth first strike with weapons. We started with suggestion. Confused murmurs rolled through the room like distant thunder. She activated another cube, not red this time, but a neutral white glow, almost unassuming. What emerged were slices of history familiar to everyone present: a trade route restructured, an interstellar refugee pact passed by slim margin, a planetary armistice enforced despite historical opposition. The Drakari Wisori Mineral Treaty, signed 23 cycles ago, initiated by a leaked diplomatic cable originally traced back to a Catalak courier, Sophia stated calmly. But the courier was intercepted 2 days prior and provided with rewritten contents by Earth. Gasps followed, soft but sharp. Sophia continued. The refugee sanctuary bill that saved the Talari migration voted through after a sudden shift in voting blocks. Influenced by subtle psychological modeling provided to your aides via humanitarian briefings crafted in our lunar consulate. Ambassador Calix's form rippled in disturbance. You mean you fabricated crises to shape votes? No, Sophia replied smoothly. We amplified inevitable crises. We simply shortened your indecision window and nudged your perception to match what we'd already modeled as the most stabilizing path. General Tech's voice rang with restrained fury. That is manipulation. That's undiplomatic interference. Sophia turned slightly toward him. Is it more undiplomatic than watching systems burn while councils bicker? We didn't change outcomes. We made you more efficient at choosing them. The chamber simmered with indignation, but beneath it, recognition. Unspoken memories surfaced among delegates. Choices they'd made, persuasions that had seemed natural, unquestioned impulses to support one side over another, framed in what had felt like their own judgment. Now recontextualized as engineered. A low voice broke the tension. It was Ambassador Dejin of the Arconians, who rarely voiced emotion. There was a session on information sovereignty 5 years ago, he said. We voted to delay encryption upgrades citing budget strains. It never made sense. But Earth had presented a study that day about neural fatigue linked to data noise. We quoted it. Now I wonder if that study was even peer-reviewed. Sophia didn't confirm. She didn't deny. Her silence was acknowledgement enough. You made us complicit, Zuloi hissed. You made us the instruments of our own deception. No, Sophia corrected. You were the instruments. We simply tuned the frequency. Calyx snapped. And what gives you the right? No right, she answered. Just responsibility. That word settled like dust on a grave. For the first time, the council didn't erupt into protests. They simply sat in it. Because somewhere beneath the outrage was an even deeper discomfort, the realization that this was more effective than any invasion. Influence so delicate it was mistaken for one's own free will. Control so quiet it never felt like chains. Then Sophia said the line that changed everything. We're not here to conquer. We're here to curate. Some delegates stared in disbelief. Others clenched their jaws or extended neural tendrils as if trying to cross-reference every memory. You assume war is fought on the battlefield, she said, walking slowly, now pacing like a teacher in front of a class too stunned to speak. But Earth learned a long time ago the battlefield is just where the consequences play out. The real war is for perception, and we've been winning that for decades, Lorax, still simmering, muttered. So you admit Earth sees itself as above this council? Sophia stopped walking and looked at him, not with defiance, not with condescension, but with a quiet sadness. We never wanted to be above, she said, but we couldn't afford to be beneath. We're not the strongest. We're not the oldest. But we've survived things none of you can model. We designed this web, this guidance, not for dominance, but because the galaxy you built was unstable and no one else would fix it. She turned toward the center of the chamber and triggered a final projection. It showed not battles, not fleets, but influence trails. One after another, links lit up decisions, swayed treaties, signed alliances, broken or forged, all tracing back not to direct orders from Earth, but moments. Words, data, phrases inserted with surgical precision into the minds of decision-makers. You thought we were players, she said softly, but we were the ones setting the board. There was no laughter, no outrage now, just realization. Sophia gave them a moment, then stepped back and said, this is the moment when you must decide whether Earth is a manipulator or a moderator, whether we've betrayed you or saved you from yourselves. But make no mistake, this room has never been outside our reach. We didn't infiltrate it. We built the floor it stands on. Calyx slowly whispered something in his native tongue. The translation came through a second later, crisp and chilling. The spider, did not land in the web. It spun it around us while we were blinking. Sophia let the weight of her last words linger in the air, like the echo of a blade just unsheathed. Her gaze didn't waver as she turned, slowly, methodically activating another segment of the projection lattice. This time, the light from the cube didn't display fleets or intercepted communications. Instead, it rippled into moving images, vivid scenes across distant worlds. A child in a mining outpost on Varnus reciting the Earth alphabet. A popular drama series, unmistakably Terran in tone, and aesthetic being projected in a Trinari leisure dome. A protest on the capital moon of the Telari sector placards, written in hybrid dialect, laced with distinctly human slogans. The council chamber fell into a stunned hush. This was no longer a military briefing. It was something far deeper. Cultural vectors, Sophia said calmly but clearly. That's what we call them in our internal doctrine. We realized early that ships could only go so far, but stories, symbols, memes, they could go everywhere. The Arconians were the first to begin processing the implication Dozens of light pulses danced across their skin. Ambassador Dajan's core dimmed in rhythmic silence, a sign of heavy internal calculation. Sophia continued. Earth's culture didn't spread through force. It spread through utility, through emotion, through relatability. You adopted our tools because they made things easier. You adopted our narratives because they made you feel seen. You began to quote our philosophers in your policies, your artists in your broadcasts, your comedians in your political satire. A brief pause, and no one questioned it because it didn't feel foreign. It felt inevitable. She shifted the projection again. Now it showed linguistic maps. You call it standard trade tongue, Sophia said, referring to the most widely used language in interstellar discourse. But its grammar is derived 80% from Terran English with syntax influences from Mandarin and Swahili. It's not galactic. It's human. There was a long silence as the delegates processed that. Many had never questioned the origin of the tongue they used daily. Others had assumed it had evolved naturally from multi-species contact. Sophia's smile was thin. You thought it was consensus. It was design. General Tech stood again, visibly agitated. So you're saying Earth reprogrammed us with songs and sitcoms? No, Sophia replied, we didn't reprogram you. We offered you mirrors. You just liked what you saw in them. A few murmurs, uneasy, defensive, spread across the room. She didn't let them grow. This wasn't about control, she said. It was about calibration. When you tell a story that resonates, people lean toward you. Not because you pulled them, but because they stepped closer. Voluntarily. And if enough people step toward you, the center of gravity shifts. Ambassador Galax exhaled a cloud of iridescent vapor, his species' version of a sigh. We rewrote our education modules around your moral structures, he said quietly. We told ourselves it was logical, but it was emotional. That's why it worked. Sophia nodded. Logic can be debated. Emotion settles deeper. Then, as if to drive the point home, she displayed an excerpt from a popular Brunot child's fable, which mirrored the arc of a Terran myth almost word for word. Another overlay compared legal reforms in 3 major systems, all inspired by human jurisprudence frameworks. You didn't notice, she said, because it didn't come as a sword. It came as a seed. Suddenly, the room began to shift. Reactions once subtle turned visceral. Prefect Zuloy's mandibles curled tightly, her bioluminescent markings dimming. You've invaded our thoughts, she hissed. With no ships, no armies. And yet Sophia replied, you still have your worlds, your languages, your traditions. We didn't erase anything. We layered. That's worse, Zuloy barked. You let us believe we were sovereign. You are, Sophia replied gently. But sovereignty means nothing if you don't know what's influencing your decisions. The room stirred again, but this time it was no longer just embarrassment. It was discomfort wrapped in awe. And then, Sophia dropped the final twist. There's one more thing. Her tone lowered. Every major attempt to probe Earth's defenses, every reconnaissance operation, every test incursion was detected, neutralized, quietly. She raised her hand and a classified feed came online, filtered through anonymized perspectives. One showed a stealth vessel from the Drakari, veering off course due to navigation drift, in truth rerouted by signal spoofing. Another depicted a synthetic probe from the Katalak being fed a fabricated terrain map, returning home with completely falsified geodata. One even showed a corrupted implant directive inside a Razic diplomat, subtly adjusted to produce diplomatic hesitation, buying Earth months of strategic preparation. 47, she said flatly. That's how many attempts were made over the last 30 standard years. None of them succeeded. None of them were noticed, until now. General Tech looked like he was ready to leap across the chamber. Impossible. Even we couldn't have caught all that. You couldn't, Sophia said, because you didn't have to. You were the ones attempting them. Her voice didn't rise, but it landed like a verdict. We caught them, we documented them, and then we let them go, because we weren't ready to make this public until we realized the attacks wouldn't stop. Orvental, who had been ominously silent for too long, finally spoke. If Earth was able to prevent these intrusions so completely, without retaliation, without diplomacy, without exposure. What else have you prevented? Sophia answered without blinking. Several small wars. 3 major ones. 11 coup attempts within minor governments, 1 attempted bioweapon deployment, 2 artificial famines, all neutralized. Quietly, how someone whispered. With information, she said. And patience. The chamber was no longer angry. It was reverent, or fearful, or both. They had come expecting to see a species defend itself. Instead, they were watching a civilization that had already won without ever declaring victory. Sophia took a final step back, letting the lights dim. Earth doesn't seek power, she said, but we understand it. We use it carefully, because we remember what it's like to be weak, to be prey. And because of that, we became something else. Not hunters, not rulers, but custodians of quiet control. No one moved, not even Lorax. And in that silence, they realized something terrifyingly beautiful. War was never Earth's strategy. Influence was. And in that game, Earth had already redrawn the map. Sophia Hart stood with her hands folded calmly behind her back, the council chamber still cloaked in the stunned silence left behind by the last revelation. The maps had faded. The projections were gone. Only her voice remained now quiet but iron-bound. What if I told you she said that in the last 30 standard years, there have been 9 interstellar wars that never happened, not because of diplomacy, not because of fear, but because we stopped them before the first shot was fired? Her words didn't trigger immediate outrage. This time the council listened. The implications were far too vast to interrupt. She began to walk, not pacing, but choosing each step with precision. 9 wars. Not minor skirmishes, not political bluffing. Full-scale coordinated military campaigns. Each one developed in secret, hidden from the public, hidden from the council. And each one predicted, disrupted, and dissolved before it could breach awareness. A projection activated again, this one not from a cube, but from a neural uplink deep within Sophia's own jacket lining. It displayed schematics of fleet trajectories, intercepted command trees, and worst-case impact simulations for planetary casualties that, had they occurred, would have rewritten borders in blood and ash. The Drakari maneuver over Sector 12, the Hive's silent fleet amassing beyond the Kalari Drift. The Talari's plan to fracture the Saurian coalition through proxy destabilization. All of them stopped before they were named, let alone fought. How? Asked Orvental, his voice quieter than before. There was no accusation in his tone now, only curiosity mixed with unease. Sophia answered without a pause. Because we already knew. We've been watching not just your ships, but your psychology, your patterns, the stress fractures in your economy, the tone shifts in your leadership, the signals hidden in your poetry, and your encryption mistakes. The Sentinel Web doesn't just listen, it anticipates. The chamber darkened slightly as a new figure appeared in the projection, a glowing amorphous neural network model that pulsed with complexity far beyond linear comprehension. We call it Lena, Sophia said, logical extrapolation and neutralization architecture, an Earth-built AI, initially developed to predict human conflicts, now upgraded, iterative. It runs 10 quadrillion pattern simulations per day. It predicts not only actions but intention. It watches the friction before it becomes heat. The figure rotated, displaying input streams, trade patterns, public media shifts, genome modulation trends, biometric spikes in leadership circles. Every conflict, Sophia said, starts with deviation. Lena finds it, models it, determines what string to pull, so it never begins. The implications staggered the delegates. You've been using AI to puppet interstellar balance, asked Ambassador Calix, stunned. No, Sophia replied. Lena doesn't pull strings. She hands us scissors. We decide what threads to cut. Zuloi, more emotionally shaken than ever, hissed. And what if this Lena decides Earth itself is a threat? Then she would warn us, Sophia said simply. Because Lena doesn't decide. She advises. Humanity made her, but she is not above us. She is our mirror. Nothing more. But mirrors crack, muttered General Tech. And when they do, what watches back is no longer you. Sophia did not flinch. We know that's why Lena is not a single core. She's distributed, memory sharded, monitored by human councils across 3 independent colonies, each with air-gapped analog overrides. No command can pass without triple consensus and biometric verification. We don't trust unchecked power, even our own. Even the Arconians who prided themselves on logic looked staggered. Ambassador Dajan's lights dimmed low. You've built a predictive oracle and used it to end wars we never knew existed. Yes, Sophia confirmed. And if you're wondering why Earth didn't use this to dominate, it's because we learned something many of you haven't. She stepped forward once again. The most efficient form of warfare is the one no one realizes you've already won. Lorax snorted, but even his scorn had dulled. This is cowardice disguised as intellect. You prevent war with whispers and math. But you've never faced the forge, never been tested in open fire. Sophia turned to him slowly. General Earth has endured more internal extinction events than any member in this room. We've burned our atmosphere, choked our oceans, clawed through ideologies that nearly unmade us. We were forged not by conquest but by consequences, and we learned any fool can win by force. But to never have to fight, that is strength. Somewhere behind the rows of delegates, one of the Vernat aides whispered to her superior. She didn't realize her microphone was still open, and the words echoed faintly. They won without bleeding. And in that accidental utterance lay the new fear. Because bleeding meant honor. War meant ritual. Death meant something to avenge. But Earth's method. There was no martyrdom in it, no heroics, no graves to rally around. It was war without memory, power without parade. And that was horrifying. Calyx exhaled again, this time slower. You've turned peace into a weapon. We've turned peace into a process, Sophia said. Because the only thing more dangerous than war is letting others decide when it happens. She paused, letting the silence sink in, then added with finality, you may not like that Earth became the moderator of this galactic system, but ask yourselves how many of you would be alive if we hadn't. And with that, the chamber fell still again, not in shock this time, but in revelation. They weren't just behind Earth. They'd been protected by Earth, and never once had they realized it. The chamber was silent, so still that even the ambient hum of neural dampeners and translation nodes felt too loud, intrusive against the void left behind by Sophia's revelations. No protests, no rebuttals, just motionless figures across dozens of species, all processing the same uncomfortable truth. They had been outmaneuvered not by firepower or fleet count, but by subtlety, patience, and design. Sophia stood quietly, not demanding further attention, merely waiting. And they said nothing, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything they could say now sounded foolish compared to what had just been revealed. Pride had no voice in this moment. The silence wasn't surrender. It wasn't consent. It was calculation. The kind of pause predators make when they realize the thing in front of them isn't prey. Some of them were afraid, yes, but others were simply adjusting, rewriting their entire framework of perception to include Earth not as a curiosity, but as a constant, a force that had always been present, always shaping, and had chosen until now to remain unseen. That choice was what unsettled them most, not the power itself, but the restraint. If Earth could manipulate, predict, and neutralize 9 wars without detection, what else could it do without anyone knowing? Still, there were pockets of disbelief. General Tech muttered to his adjutant, a low growl translated across 3 frequencies. It's a bluff, a grand performance. No species evolves that fast. But even his tone lacked conviction, and his adjutant did not echo his doubt. The Arconians remained silent, not because they denied the truth, but because their internal computation cycles had shifted entirely to re-evaluating the last half-century of interstellar decision-making. Zuloi, ever prideful, glanced at Sophia with a blend of resentment and awe. Not everyone accepted, but no one dared to deny outright. Then as the silence dragged on, something more dangerous began to bloom: suspicion. Delegates who had once aligned in alliances began to glance sideways. Subtle shifts in posture, a tilt of the head, a flick of bioluminescence, a pulsed data node handshake aborted midway. The Cadillac representative narrowed her thorax and leaned toward the Polari envoy, whispering in tones too low for most to hear, but not for the human sensors already scanning the room. Across the chamber, a Vrunat aide sent a burst packet transmission that was immediately rerouted back to its source by a passive Earthside relay. Sophia didn't comment. She let them stew in it. They had all come to the council assuming the same reality, that they were informed actors on a shared stage. Now they questioned how long the stage had been controlled and by whom. Old alliances looked fragile under this new light. Whispers carried implications. A vote shifted here. A motion vetoed there. Was it ever theirs to begin with? Sophia could see it in their eyes. The real danger now wasn't just the knowledge of Earth's involvement, it was the fear of each other. Because if Earth had watched, listened, and known, who else had spoken too freely, trusted too carelessly, backed the wrong side? Ironically, it was this distrust, this unraveling, that made Earth more indispensable than ever. As some began to look inward with suspicion, others began to glance at Sophia with something like hope. Not trust, not yet, but the bitter acceptance that if someone had been watching over them, pulling strings to prevent annihilation, perhaps it was better the puppeteer remained at the table. A threat, yes, but a stabilizing one. The predator who never struck. The blade that never swung. Sensing the unraveling tension, Sophia finally stepped forward. Her voice returned, not cold, not proud, measured. You fear what we've done, but you should be more afraid of what we haven't done. In all these years, with all this knowledge, we never moved first. We never deployed fleets. We never triggered collapse. We watched, we waited, we prepared. She paused, then added, but understand this restraint is not weakness. Earth has a history of destruction wars so complete, we rewrote continents, philosophies, even weather patterns. We've destroyed ourselves more times than most of you have changed governments. But every time, we rebuilt. Smarter, angrier, stronger. Not because we wanted war, but because we refused to be erased. She gestured and a new projection formed, not of other species, but of Earth's own past. The global conflicts, the planetary near-extinction events, the self-inflicted plagues, the slow, agonizing ascent from ashes to space. We are not warriors by design, she said. We are survivors by necessity. And in survival, we found precision. In loss, we found resolve. That is why we prepare, because we remember what happens when we don't. For the first time, the mood shifted again, not into fear, but into something deeper. Recognition. In her words, they saw not just a threat, but a mirror. Many species in the chamber had endured loss, civil wars, extinctions, rebellions. But few had survived their own self-destruction and emerged with clarity. Fewer still had turned trauma into policy. Galax finally spoke his words slow and deliberate. You could have come to us, shared this, united us with knowledge. You weren't ready, Sophia replied. Most of you still aren't. And now, he asked. Now you are, she answered, because I chose to speak today. There was no applause, no consensus, only quiet acknowledgement that the balance had changed. Not because Sophia demanded it, but because Earth had never needed to. From the beginning, it had played a game no one else knew existed. And now that the rules were exposed, no one could look away. They had feared Earth would ask for power. They hadn't realized Earth had already decided who got to keep it. The fracture was not immediate, but it was inevitable. After Sophia's revelations and the galaxy's stunned silence, the eyes that once followed General Lorax with reverence now studied him with uncertainty. Some with suspicion, others with fear. The Drakari Imperium had built its legacy on discipline, on unshakable command, on the absolute hierarchy of strength and obedience. And yet now, in the eyes of his own subcommanders, scattered across the chamber and the galaxy beyond, cracks had begun to appear in the obsidian monolith that was Lorax's authority. The first signal of dissent came not from a direct challenge, but a silence where support had always followed. High Warden Jax Lorax's second-in-command, typically the first to bark affirmations in council meetings, sat motionless. His cranial crest, normally illuminated to indicate alliance, remained darkened. A small detail, but one every Drakari in the chamber would notice. In their culture, silence was disobedience without confrontation. Sophia, watching, said nothing. The silence broke when one of Lorax's fleet captains, broadcasting remotely from the Imperium's border command relay, requested emergency asylum. Not to Earth, but to the Talari, a longtime rival of the Drakari. The message echoed across secure council frequencies. This war was never ours. We were fed false intelligence. Earth's proof confirms everything we suspected. I will not serve a corrupted chain of command. The chamber erupted not in noise but in shock. A defection. Public. On record. During a council session. It was unprecedented. The Talari delegation blinked rapidly in response, scrambling to process the legal implications. But the message had already been transmitted across hundreds of systems. This was more than embarrassment, it was decay. The Drakari military structure, so proud and monolithic, now began to corrode from within. The underlying cause was clear: their campaigns had failed not due to enemy resistance, but to invisible sabotage. Plans had dissolved without explanation. Supply ships had rerouted themselves. Morale had slipped without cause. And now in hindsight, the pieces connected. It hadn't been bad luck or internal error. Earth had been inside their command structure all along. Sophia let the council see the truth for themselves. She pulled up historical data, a campaign in the Hadron Belt that had mysteriously lost momentum despite numerical superiority. A fleet staging ground that suffered a logistical error resulting in 3 days of lost rations. A cybernetic virus that spread across ship AI units but left no traceable code. You thought these were anomalies, Sophia said, but they were course corrections. Subtle, clean, executed not on your ships, but in your minds, in your command signals, in your assumptions. The council watched as one projected scenario after another was dissected in real time. Earth had intercepted operational planning through signal drift captured on repurposed long-range weather satellites orbiting abandoned outposts. They had decoded encrypted Drakari fleet rotations from the rhythm of their supply pulses alone. Intervention came not at the point of conflict, but at the periphery, cutting supplies, seeding delays, rewriting minor protocols that compounded into mission failure. We never struck, Sophia said. We simply moved the floor out from under your feet while you marched. A particularly damning example played Operation Molten Spear, a classified Drakari assault plan meant to strike a Terran colony hidden beyond the Perseus Fold. The plan had failed before it began. As the council watched the replay of Lorax's officers preparing the assault, Sophia overlaid their internal communications with Earth's intervention timestamps. Hours before the Drakari even issued their final command, the colony had already evacuated. Lorax's fleets had arrived to find an empty shell, and their presence immediately broadcast to half the galaxy by a pre-triggered satellite beacon. That was not a battle, Sophia said. It was a statement. Lorax remained standing, but his hands were no longer clenched in dominance. They were rigid in restraint. His jaw flexed with the pressure of a fury he couldn't release, not here. The betrayal from within the exposure, the collapse it had unmade his authority more completely than any war ever could. You undermined us, he growled. Not through courage, but through cowardice. Sophia met his eyes. If we had wanted to destroy you, Lorax, you wouldn't be standing. But we chose instead to let you destroy yourself by believing no one else could outthink you. It was then that the final blow came not from Earth, but from his own allies. The Catalak Hive, long-standing partners in arms with the Drakari, retracted their support. We cannot align with instability, Prefect Zuloi declared. Our allegiance was to strength, not illusion. Others followed. The Talari offered a motion to suspend the Drakari's military vote on the council pending internal inquiry. Even the Arconians, neutral by policy, called for a formal review of the Imperium's intelligence apparatus. Lorax was no longer a pillar, he was a liability. To his credit, Lorax did not beg. He did not lash out. He stood there heavy and silent, a warlord watching the kingdom he had built dissolve like sand under glass. We may have been misled, he finally said, voice low but steady. But our pride remains. Sophia responded softly but firmly. Pride is not a strategy, it's the memory of one. And in that line she drew the final line between them, not as enemies but as symbols of two ways of thinking, brute power against calculated foresight. One fading, one rising. Lorax turned without a word, walking slowly back to his place, where none of his remaining aides dared to look him in the eye. He had not been defeated on the battlefield, but he had been undone where it hurt worse in the eyes of his own, and that Sophia knew was the only war worth winning. Sophia Hart didn't raise her hand this time. She didn't have to. The chamber had fallen into a deeper silence Then even the earlier revelations had produced a silence not born of shock, but of anticipation. They had heard enough speculation, seen enough indirect sabotage. Now they were about to be shown the undeniable, and they knew it. The cube she placed on the table was black, not neutral, not red, but obsidian, a data core encrypted across 15 layers of quantum locks marked with a Council-class authenticity seal none had seen used since the last great galactic tribunal 2 centuries prior. She activated it with a whisper. No code, no touch, just a spoken sequence. Code echo mirrorfall. The response was immediate. A time-locked encrypted file opened, and the projection system of the chamber dimmed the lights automatically. Not for effect, for security. What they saw was not simulation, but real-time, unaltered footage captured through a technology the Council had yet to classify. The scene opened in what was unmistakably a Drakari High Command war chamber. The angles were perfect, the audio pristine, the biometric pulses of every individual present displayed in the upper right corner. This was no external surveillance drone. This was from inside the room. This is real-time atmospheric map neural reflection, Sophia explained calmly. We call it ghostlight. It reads residual cognition from quantum distortion fields in a room. Meaning, this isn't just video, it's memory, reconstructed at the moment of recall. Gasps broke out across the chamber, not just for the footage, but for the method. The ghostlight system was the stuff of myth, a whispered Terran project never confirmed, believed impossible. It was said to read the shadows of thought. And now here it was playing back treason from inside a sealed military meeting. On-screen Lorax stood at the head of the table. Around him, 6 of his most trusted strategists. The timestamp in Council Standard showed the meeting had occurred 8 years ago, well before any known tensions between the Imperium and Earth. Initiate strike pattern. 3 Lorax said in the recording, we cripple their satellites, simulate an asteroid event, extract resources under cover of humanitarian assistance. Blame the atmosphere collapse on primitive energy tech. No survivors. A second voice added, and if their response units detect our cloaked entry, Lorax's reply, then we make it look like a splinter cell. Burn it down. Deny everything. No names. No flags. The room was stunned into absolute stillness. The audio was clear. The context undeniable. Lorax's face, his voice, his command, beyond interpretation or reframe. A few delegates turned slowly in their seats to stare at him. Others avoided his gaze entirely. The footage continued for another minute, showing logistical details, command transfers, names of vessels and pilots. Then it faded, and Sophia said softly, the system that captured this memory was installed covertly inside the structural architecture of the command base by someone who knew where to place it. Someone born inside the Imperium. She let that sink in before triggering a secondary data stream. Meet Commander Threx, she said as a still image appeared. Drakari, younger, leaner than most, with the distinctive violet-etched crest that marked him as a minor noble within Lorax's own bloodline. Nephew of Lorax, born and raised within the upper caste, assigned to mid-tier command roles, removed from position quietly after questioning the ethics of the Earth campaign. A hush swept across the room again. Threx came to us voluntarily, not as a defector, but as a witness. He saw the rot from within. He saw the future of the Imperium, and he chose to sever its trajectory. Calyx asked carefully, why betray his own bloodline? Because survival requires conscience, Sophia replied. And sometimes conscience grows in the places power forgets to suppress. The data stream showed decades of communication logs, field intel, and minor interventions all passed quietly through Threx in a small cadre of like-minded insiders. They had worked with Earth not to destroy the Imperium, but to prevent it from becoming something even worse. Zuloi narrowed her eyes. This began years ago, and you never brought it to the Council. Because the Council was still under the Imperium's influence, Sophia said plainly. Any early exposure would have led to Threx's death and a propaganda campaign against Earth. We needed the truth to ripen, and now it has. The atmosphere turned from stunned to procedural. Orvin Tal leaned forward, invoking the Omega Clause, the Council's rarely used emergency protocol for initiating a tribunal under conditions of verified internal threat. Under Council law, this evidence qualifies as grounds for immediate investigation and sanction. Do any object. No one spoke. Not even Lorax. A moment later, the order was signed into motion by Orvan's biometric seal. A tribunal will be convened. The accused will be placed under observation. The evidence will be preserved and distributed under level and security. An oversight committee was formed on the spot. Representatives were appointed from 7 species, 3 neutral, 2 formerly allied with the Imperium, and 1 unexpected addition, Earth. Do you accept the role? Sophia Hart, Orvan asked. She nodded once. I do. Under the principle of balance, not vengeance. Calyx gave a tight nod. If Earth is as calculated as you say, then perhaps they're the only ones capable of holding the knife without using it. The statement was met with tense agreement. The Council knew that Earth's involvement would make the trial legitimate or terrifying. Either way, the illusion of control was gone. And Sophia, she didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply returned to her seat, folded her hands, and looked forward. Not at Lorax, not at the delegates, but at the space beyond the chamber's skylight, where the stars spun on oblivious and eternal. She had not come to win. She had come to end something before it began. And she had. The courtroom did not stand on any planet. It floated weightless, elegant, and cold in the Luraeus expanse, a neutral orbit far from any territorial claim. Built centuries ago but rarely used, the Ark of Judgment was a council-class tribunal vessel shaped like a fractured ring, encasing a hollow center through which light from a distant blue star poured. 12 judicial bays, each housing a delegate of high authority, overlooked the central hall where a singular figure now stood under the scrutiny of the Galaxy General Lorax of the Drakari Imperium. The decision to hold the trial here was not arbitrary. The Ark could not be hacked. It had no political affiliation. Its creation was authorized only under Article X of the Galactic Concord, a trial held when the actions of a single individual posed existential threat not just to one species, but to the entire interstellar order. The Council had invoked it only 4 times in known history, and now for the 5th time, it opened its sealed gates not for a warlord from the outer fringe, nor a rogue AI, but for one of their own. The tribunal was public by necessity. The decision to air it across all major channels of the galaxy had stirred unease among several races. Was it to deter future threats? Was it political theater? Some whispered it was a warning from Earth. This is what happens when you miscalculate. But officially, the decision was guided by transparency. The evidence was too severe, too broad. To contain it would be to pretend the structure of the Council still held. It did not. The chamber itself was nearly silent as the charges were read. Violations of the Pax Interstellaris. Breach of Article 7 of the Non-Aggression Pact. Conspiracy to commit planetary sabotage. Unauthorized development of cloaked planetary infiltration technology. And most damning of all, intent to commit genocide under the veil of strategic extraction. Each charge carried a sentence. Some were centuries in exile. Others were obliteration of titles, families, and histories. But one charge, mumbled nearly beneath the breath of the prosecutor prime, made even the hard-faced delegates flinch. Crimes against non-hostile sapients. That charge alone could sentence Lorax to permanent memory disintegration. No one had dared invoke it in the past 400 years. Lorax stood tall, still armored, though stripped of insignia. The chains around his wrists were symbolic. He could tear them apart in moments, but doing so would end his species' political future. I reject the legitimacy of this farce, he snarled. A trial orchestrated by the very species that poisoned our alliances and corrupted our bloodlines. You do not seek justice, you seek compliance. From behind him a single voice replied, calm, clear, devastating in its precision. We seek reckoning, General. Sophia Hart stepped into the light. No longer merely Earth's representative today, she stood as the principal witness and architect of the indictment that had brought the trial to bear. Dressed not in the formal silver of the human diplomatic corps, but in midnight black marked only with the rotating insignia of the Terran Defense Intelligence. Her presence was not dramatic, but inevitable. The prosecutor prime nodded toward her. Miss Hart, you may begin. She did not use notes. Instead, she activated a neural link interface embedded discreetly beneath her collarbone. A long scroll of holographic text unfolded in the center of the courtroom, 23 pages in compressed form over 800 data points. 300 witness markers and 217 flagged anomalies, every single one tied to General Lorax's command trail. This cause, Sophia began, is not a case of ambition gone astray. It is not the story of a misguided military commander acting alone. This is the systematic construction of a false narrative designed to destabilize Earth to trigger a multi-front distraction and to execute resource seizure under the cloak of disaster relief. It is in every measurable way an engineered extinction plan. Her voice was not loud, but it carried like thunder across the silence. She walked slowly as she spoke, the scroll responding to her gestures. Exhibit 12, Tactical Interference in the Arcturus Corridor. Cloaked movement of extraction drones registered 96 times. No public logs. All routes cross-verified with Imperium fleet signatures. A murmur ran through the audience. She continued. Exhibit 19, Fabricated meteorological events on Earth's lunar base traced to Imperium code-based weather disruptors. 4 confirmed fatalities, buried in unrelated reports. When she reached Exhibit 31, the chamber seemed to hold its breath. This is a transcript, not of a command meeting but of a lullaby, sang by a Drakari nurse to her child in Sector 18. In it, she speaks of cleansing the blue world, of her son growing up in a cleaner galaxy. This was not merely strategy, it was ideology, passed down, baked into the next generation before the war had even begun. At this, one of the tribunal judges, Vithal of the Marnak cluster, shook his head and whispered, "Even their children were prepared. It was not for the record, but it was not unnoticed." Lorax growled, "You twist truths and fabricate sentiment. The Earthlings are masters of illusion. They crawl through the shadows, sow paranoia. This is their way. You applaud her because you fear her. But fear is not justice." Sophia turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I would rather you hate us than understand us, General. At least then, you won't pretend this wasn't your choice." The question hung for a moment. Would anyone speak in his defense? One delegate stirred, Ambassador Gren of the Galaxy Union. Known for strict neutrality, "I will not defend Lorax," he said slowly. "But I ask, is Earth's influence so far-reaching that we should fear this trial is already scripted?" Sophia looked up at him. "Then examine the evidence yourself. Tear it apart. Find the seams. If you find even one false thread, call me a liar before this entire galaxy. But if you do not, then know that Earth was never scripting a play. We were holding a mirror." Gren sat back, and no one else spoke. As the final segments of the indictment were submitted, including first-hand testimony logs from Drakari officers, now in witness protection, it became clear no defense could withstand the weight. The tribunal recessed for deliberation. It took less than 4 hours, a record in the history of the Ark. When the verdict was read, there was no cheer, just silence. General Lorax, formerly High Strategos of the Drakari Imperium, was found guilty on all 17 counts. His sentence, lifetime confinement in the oubliette sphere, a gravitational prison orbiting the collapsed star of Valkar, where no sound, no light, no thought escaped. Sophia did not smile. She bowed her head once and only once as the sentence was sealed. Justice, in her view, had never been about satisfaction. It was about memory, and now the galaxy would remember. The judgment was passed in a voice that held no malice, no emotion, only the weight of law. By order of the Galactic Council under Article Westerami's, Section 1700B, General Lorax of the Drakari Imperium is hereby sentenced to permanent isolation within the oubliette sphere. That name alone carried legends. Orbiting the collapsed star of Valkar, the oubliette sphere was not a place for rehabilitation. It was the final destination for the unforgivable. A void within a void built at the edge of gravity's reach, where neither message nor signal could escape. It was guarded not by soldiers, but by the laws of physics itself. There were no doors, no lights, no sound. Just a singular capsule perpetually rotating in quantum lock. No one had ever returned from it. No one ever would. As the words echoed across the chamber, General Lorax did not flinch. His eyes narrowed, jaw clenched, but he gave no outburst. No plea, no final threat. He simply turned toward Sophia Hart, his once proud shoulders heavy with resignation. "You fear us because you cannot control us," he said, his voice low and rough. Sophia did not reply. She simply watched unwavering as the stasis collar was magnetically sealed around his neck, rendering him immobile in time until transport. There was nothing left to argue, but Lorax was not alone in his downfall. The investigation had unearthed more than his schemes. Logs, encrypted communications, and intel from Earth's deep cover agents had implicated a web of collaborators, officers, strategists, even diplomatic envoys from 3 neighboring systems. In total, 28 individuals were arrested within the span of 48 hours, their identities transmitted directly to Council enforcement across the quadrants. The names ranged from the minor low-ranking operatives to the unthinkable Minister Cal Reth of the Seraphon Rings and military envoy Burke Thalen from the Caltrax Dominion. Some systems erupted in outrage. The Seraphon Council demanded independent review, crying foul over Terran manipulation of the judicial process. Others, like the Dominion, quietly accepted the arrest, choosing to erase all digital traces of the accused as if they'd never existed. When the Caltrax representative was questioned, she replied simply, "We had long suspected. We were merely waiting for the blade to fall." It became clear that Earth's revelation had done more than expose Lorax. It had forced a reckoning many species had long avoided. The galaxy for a moment saw itself reflected in Earth's mirror. Sophia Hart stood silently during the announcement of the arrests. A few council members glanced at her, half expecting a list of further demands or reparations. She offered none. When asked whether she would seek additional sanctions or trials, she answered with only one sentence: "Justice is not currency." The room understood. Earth had never sought vengeance. They had sought acknowledgement. And now they had it. In the wake of the trial, however, the Council issued an emergency decree. Special surveillance measures were to be implemented in the outer peripheries surrounding Sol, the system of Earth. The measures, disguised under the language of strategic precaution, were essentially a quiet quarantine. Sensor buoys, quantum traffic logs, and diplomatic relay scanners were authorized to be deployed within light years of Earth's boundary. Officially, they were meant to ensure stability. Unofficially, they were watching the humans. The declaration stirred discomfort. The Bracken envoy was the first to voice protest. "Are we now to fear those we once pitied? You would monitor the most stable planet in the quadrant as if it were a contagion." Others followed suit. The Tavari called it an insult wrapped in diplomacy, while the Galaxy Union submitted a formal motion to delay the deployment. But Earth remained silent. Or rather, Sophia Hart did. When offered the opportunity to comment, she declined. Her silence was not of consent nor resistance. It was strategy. By neither endorsing nor opposing the motion, Earth avoided the trap of protest. They remained inscrutable as always. A question unasked hovering in every mind. What does Earth know that we don't? Behind closed doors, a few whispered darker concerns. If Earth had known everything before, wouldn't they also have anticipated this surveillance? Could the humans be playing even this, allowing themselves to be watched to lull the watchers into complacency? No one said it aloud, but in the sudden awkward politeness exchanged between diplomats, the truth was visible. Earth was no longer just part of the game. They were the ones who wrote the rulebook. As Lorax was escorted to the transport chamber, the corridor seemed impossibly quiet. He passed by Sophia one last time, eyes burning. "You're not stronger," he muttered. "You're colder." She gave no answer. She simply walked away, her steps steady, her presence casting longer shadows than her figure. Some said afterward that Lorax had not been led to his prison. He had already been living in it from the moment he underestimated Earth. The sentence had been delivered. The galaxy shaken returned to its orbit. But in the hush that followed, no one could forget what had happened. The mightiest warlord of the quadrant had not been destroyed in battle, nor overthrown by rebellion. He had been undone by information, by silence, by a species no one had feared until now. There was a moment in the chamber, brief, barely noticeable, when the air itself seemed to change. It wasn't the rustle of robes or the low hum of translation drones. It was deeper, a shift in perception. The realization that perhaps, just perhaps, everything until now had been orchestrated. Sophia Hart, still standing at the center of the assembly, adjusted her posture slightly. It was a simple motion, but the weight it carried was unmistakable. She wasn't finished, not yet. "I must correct a common misconception." She began, her tone cool, even surgical. "Earth was never merely defending itself. We were not the mouse in the maze. We were the architects of the maze. A flick of her wrist brought up a hollow projection, an intricate network of timelines, encounter logs, and diplomatic transcripts. One thread blinked red. This, she said, was Operation Candletrap. It began 35 cycles ago when a false energy anomaly was seeded at sector GL2208. Intelligence suggested it would attract the attention of resource-hungry fleets, particularly those with aggressive expansionist histories. She looked directly at the delegation from the Drakari Imperium, which of course it did. Gasps echoed. The Candletrap anomaly had triggered a series of diplomatic alarms a decade ago. Several systems had dispatched reconnaissance ships which were mysteriously lost. The cause had never been explained. Now it was clear they had flown directly into Earth's net. We needed our adversaries to reveal themselves, Sophia continued, and there is no better way than to offer them an opportunity too tempting to ignore. We created the bait. We wrote the rumors. We even leaked false schematics of unclaimed terraforming worlds in proximity to Earth's patrol zone. Every action, every reaction, it was all part of a controlled cascade. One of the counselors, a gnarled creature from the outer moons of Coralith, leaned forward, his voice trembling. Are you saying Earth provoked an interstellar threat on purpose? Yes, Sophia said plainly. And we were right to do so. A murmur of horror passed through the chamber. Another counselor snapped. That's a violation of every diplomatic accord we have. To which Sophia replied, Is it though? Read the accords closely. There are no provisions against simulated threats. We did not fire the first shot. We merely opened the door and watched who chose to step in. Then came the second hammer blow. Many of the crises you recall, pirate uprisings, trade route, disturbances, border disputes, were not organic, she revealed. They were created. We forged phantom fleets, falsified distress beacons, and simulated cultural provocations, all to observe the behavior of our supposed allies. The projection shifted again, displaying a list of incidents. Beside each controlled variable, some of the most notorious events in recent history were now revealed as manufactured. Operation Shattered Oath, the Triton Revolt, the Black Signal Treaty Breach, all staged, all monitored. Counselor Vex Madar of the Tellan Combine stood fists clenched. The Triton Revolt cost us 37 vessels. We lost kin that was fabricated. Sophia met his fury with clinical calm. We regret your losses. They were informative. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged glances that revealed more than words could. The uneasy question hung in the air. Had they acted under manipulation? Had they been pawns too? Some realized they had voted in favor of policies or turned against former allies based on what now appeared to be manufactured provocations. Their silence turned from confusion to shame. It was necessary, Sophia stated. Loyalty is not tested in peace. It is revealed in pressure. There was no pride in her voice, only resolution. Then came the final revelation, delivered not with a dramatic flourish, but with disarming ease. Even this tribunal, Sophia said, gesturing around the chamber, was calculated. Not the events leading to it, not the verdict, but your reactions, your fear, your need to display control through legality. We anticipated it. Several representatives froze. Impossible, one whispered. Sophia walked toward the center display, tapping a node. The image changed a dossier titled Juris Predict Model V9. 7. Judicial Outcome Forecasting. We've been modeling council jurisprudence patterns for over 2 centuries. Using linguistic behavior, cultural precedents, and legal doctrine, we can simulate council decisions within a 98% accuracy margin. She turned slowly, locking eyes with each of the stunned representatives. Your laws are your logic, but logic can be mapped. Logic can be rehearsed. The only uncertainty was how long it would take you to catch up. What you are suggesting, rumbled a member of the Seraphon Rings, is a form of legal warfare. Call it what you will, Sophia replied. We prefer strategic foresight. One voice, small, barely audible, rose from the back. Then why tell us now? It was Counselor Reen of the Vathari, a race known for patience and subterranean wisdom. You could have let us stew in ignorance. You had the advantage. Why give it up? Sophia tilted her head. Because true control doesn't come from hiding. It comes from the knowledge that we can expose the truth at any time, and still be respected. Or feared. Another pause. Another weight added to the collective silence. The council did not protest, not this time. What could they say? That they were victims? That they'd been fooled? That they were angry? They were all of those things. But more than anything, they were outmaneuvered. The idea that Earth had not only defended itself, but set the entire chessboard sent ripples of awe and dread through the chamber. No longer was humanity the unpredictable wild card. They were something worse, predictably dominant. That day no votes were cast, no motions proposed. The council simply recessed its members, leaving quietly, each consumed by a singular thought. How long had the humans been planning this? And deep in the archives of Earth's intelligence core, long before the tribunal, a note had already been filed. Outcome 4C Alpha confirmed. Psychological containment successful. Phase shift unnecessary. Surveillance continues. They had expected everything, even this silence. There was no thunder in her voice, no grand gesture, no symphonic overture to accompany the final truth. Sophia Hart stood calm, her posture unchanged since the beginning. Yet everything in the chamber felt different now, weighted, suspended, as though time itself hesitated to hear what she would say next. Earth, she said softly, was never a victim. The words fell like a blade across stone, sharp, irrefutable. Silence followed, not the kind that seeks a response, but the kind that demands reflection. Around her, the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat motionless. No rebuttal, no protest, because deep down they knew, or perhaps they had always suspected. Sophia chose this moment not at the beginning, not during the heat of trial, but now in the stillness after victory, because this was when truth cuts the deepest. You all believed we were behind, weak, unpredictable, that we survived by sheer luck, not by design. That belief served us well. She smiled, not with arrogance, but with something far more dangerous, certainty. But it was never true. We chose the shadows not because we feared the light, but because the light fears what it reveals. One delicate breath caught in his throat whispered, "Then who are you really?" Sophia answered with no flourish, no boast. Just a sentence. "We are the variable you forgot to control." There was a long silence after that. No translation drones moved. No notes were scribbled. Even the ambient hum of the chamber seemed subdued, as if the room itself understood it had just borne witness to something irreversible. Sophia's expression held no mockery, only resolve. She did not gloat. That was not her way. Her demeanor was that of someone who had seen 1,000 futures and chosen the only one that would ensure survival, not just for Earth, but for everyone. She continued, "For over 50 years, humanity has steered the web of diplomacy in this galaxy. Not with fleets, not with weapons, but with the subtle gravity of influence. We've redirected trade, neutralized hostilities, curated narratives, and decided who shakes hands and who points guns. Holograms bloomed around her maps of alliances, treaties, collapsed coalitions, and rising federations. None of this is accidental. Every shift you thought was fate was by design." A stunned delegate from the Eastern Mer Coalition muttered, "But we proposed that trade corridor ourselves." Sophia turned her gaze to him. "Did you, or were you simply given the right data, the right moment, the right push?" She did not need to say more. Across the room, several representatives lowered their heads in dawning realization. What had felt like self-determination now reeked of orchestration. Those who once prided themselves on independence now questioned every decision, every alliance. How many of them had merely danced to Earth's unseen rhythm? Some were angry, yes, but others were in awe. One delegate from the crystalline archipelagos of Tajar leaned toward their neighbor and whispered, "We should have studied them, not ignored them." Another, a silicon-bodied tactician from the Dravuan Reach, stared at Sophia as if witnessing a new star being born. "They moved without moving," he murmured. "They won without war." And that was the point. Earth had remained stable not by flexing military muscle, but by mastering narrative and influence. Sophia explained power does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it listens before it speaks. Sometimes it lets others believe they are in control. That is the Earth doctrine. She left unspoken the obvious: it had worked, and no one had seen it coming. Some civilizations, quiet, calculating, now saw Earth as a model. The Valari Sanctum, long admirers of subtlety, nodded respectfully. Even the mercantile Lavarians began transmitting diplomatic overtures seconds after the session ended. Not in defiance, but in recognition. Earth had done what others only dreamed of: shaped the galaxy without lifting a blade. Then Sophia stepped forward one final time, her voice low, deliberate. "So now I ask you, what is Earth?" She let the silence stretch heavy and profound. "Is it your friend, perhaps? Is it your enemy? Possibly. Or is it something else entirely? Something beyond definition?" No one answered. Because there was no answer. "We are not bound by the roles you write for us," Sophia said. "We are the fulcrum, not the weight, the tide, not the vessel. And whether you see us as salvation or shadow, know this: our existence ensures balance. Our silence ensures peace. But if that silence ever breaks—" She paused, letting the words linger. "If we ever choose war, there will be no front line. Because by then, we'll already be behind yours." That was the final breath of the council that day. No declarations, no denials. Only understanding, terrifying, irreversible understanding. Earth had always been watching, always calculating, always ready. And now that readiness was no longer hidden. Sophia Hart turned her footsteps, the only sound, as she exited the chamber. Behind her, the great minds of the galaxy remained still, grappling with a truth too vast to speak aloud. The galaxy did not erupt in war. It did not fracture under the weight of revelation. No systems seceded, no armies mobilized. What happened instead was far quieter and far more telling. In the weeks that followed Sophia Hart's revelations, star nations grew quieter. Communication slowed. Treaties were reread, not rewritten. Even the loudest of voices chose their words with more care. It was as though the universe itself had taken a breath, unsure of what to exhale next. A new kind of balance had emerged, not one enforced by guns or fleets, but by the sheer knowledge that somewhere, somehow, Earth was listening. Some called it peace. Others called it fear. But everyone agreed on one thing: nothing would ever be the same. Children were taught the history of the Tribunal Day, but not all teachers agreed on what lesson it carried. Some said it was a warning. Others said it was a miracle of restraint. A few believed it was the birth of a new galactic era, one no longer ruled by strength, but by subtlety. And in the long halls of Earth's intelligence core, deep beneath the crust of a planet dismissed for so long as primitive, a signal remained active, pulsing once every 7 seconds.